New Breed Logistics is the client. They are a logistics and warehouse management company in Greensboro, North Carolina. And they were going through a refresh of their core business applications, particularly their Oracle database infrastructure and a lot of the applications running in a virtualized environment running on Intel. The competitive landscape was interesting. There were multiple vendors. Right there, you had HP, Intel, Sun Microsystems for a Unix environment, Oracle database, EMC storage, NetApp storage, and and Cisco from a network standpoint. And they were at 1 gig at the time. They were looking to do an upgrade to 10 gig. They wanted to maintain their fiber channel infrastructure. So there were a lot of different moving parts. And when they first came to us, they came to us out of an interest in an integrated solution. We did several discussions with them around PureFlex. We brought in multiple executives, and we leveraged the Raleigh Briefing Center. We leveraged some of the folks in development in Raleigh. So we were very fortunate in the sense that we were close, proximity-wise, to a lot of the resources to help us. They then basically asked us for an RFQ, and then when we responded to that, they came back and said, we would like to break this apart. We decided that we want to look at best-of-breed infrastructures as opposed to an integrated infrastructure, but we're particularly interested in IBM's Flex systems, not necessarily the PureFlex because we don't necessarily need all of those components, but the BTO model. And one of the big differentiators for us was the fact that we were flexible in how we could deliver our solution. We allowed them to maintain their fiber channel infrastructure. We allowed them to grow into the 10 gig infrastructure, right? So we could start with 1 gig, move to 10 gig. They liked the fact that our switches would then be able to upgrade to FCOE in the future. Right, so they felt that there was a lot of future-proofing in our solution. From a power standpoint, they felt that although they were only going to look at the Intel infrastructure running VMware on day 0, that within the next 365 days they were going to also consider refreshing the Sun Microsystems environment, and they liked the fact that they could run Unix in that same infrastructure that we were delivering Intel on day 0. So, the openness of our architecture enabled us to stay in the running, even though the integrated solution that they had originally contacted us about was, basically off the table for them because it was just too much for them to swallow at one time. So some of the objections we faced were around the network. They were standardized on Cisco. There were some concerns around how would IBM networking integrate into that Cisco environment? What would the challenges be for their team in terms of administering our switches versus Cisco switches? And the first thing that we did was demo our equipment to them so that they could see what the interface looked like. Right? The first thing we wanted to do is overcome the political struggle around, is it difficult to manage for my team, right? And what we were able to demonstrate to them was that there was actually a larger jump for them to go from their existing Cisco infrastructure to a Nexus infrastructure than it was to go from a Cisco infrastructure today to an IBM networking infrastructure. So they felt comfortable that they had the skills and the resources to manage our tools, and that basically eliminated the management discussion. One of the big differentiators for us versus the competition from a network standpoint was the architecture of how we do networking. The fact that we were east-west in our topology versus Cisco's north-south topology going to the top of rack, while we didn't necessarily show them any analytical data, benchmark-wise, they understood the concept of keeping all the traffic localized within the chassis as opposed to having to go out to a top-of-rack switch. So they realized that we were looking at the data center from a holistic standpoint as opposed to attacking it just from the network or just from a server or just from a storage perspective, right? And I think that a lot of our competition went into this project with a focus specifically on what they did as their core competency, and I wouldn't say ignored, but didn't have the completeness of vision that IBM could deliver to the client. So even though they didn't buy storage from us on day one, they didn't buy Unix servers from us on day one, they understood that we had a holistic vision of the data center and that we would be able to deliver all those technologies to them when they were ready to receive them. And it's important that we talk about that because New Breed had invited IBM to the table on several projects over the past 10 years, and not once did they buy anything from us, right? We were always perceived as being very segmented, disjointed, and the fact that we were able to all come together and speak about a single solution and all be on the same page in the hymn book showed the client that IBM had kind of gotten their act together and started coming to the table with a solution that everyone not just supported, but understood for the value of the organization, New Breed, as opposed to just IBM. Obviously, we're still new at this, right? But where we get the most traction is when we have conversations at a C-level, right? If we can go in and paint the vision and the strategic pathway that IBM is on from a systems standpoint, not just a server standpoint or a network standpoint, and not talk about products at all, but talk about how we envision IT, right, and how we're helping clients solve IT problems, we seem to get a lot more traction. We seem to get a lot more support within the client organization. And then the project gets worked from the top down, right, and clients figure out how do we make this fit into our environment. When we come in at the bottom, right, and we talk about widgets and speeds and feeds and what kind of server hardware is it, what kind of network gear is in it, what type of storage is in it. If we start with what's inside, what happens is clients look for a reason why it won't fit, right? And if we start at the top and we talk about a vision, people try to figure out how do I make this work in my organization.